In the previous video, we have made some changes inside our project which will help us generating the JWT tokens, like importing the dependencies inside the pom.xml, disabling the CSRF, making the configurations inside cars, along with the stopping the default generated token by leveraging session creation policy. So now in this video, let's try to create two filters. One is to generate the token and other one is to validate the JWT token for each and every request that is coming from the client. So to achieve this, first I'll create a filter with the name JWT token generator filter. So you can see here this filter extends once per request filter, which indicates that this filter is going to run only once per each request, and at the same time I also overrided the method should not filter and implemented a logic that my filter should be executed only during the login request. Since inside my application /user is a login request path, I have mentioned that whenever my path is not equal to /user, then should not filter or should not apply my filter, which will make sure that this filter will get executed only when the user trying to log in into my application. So the logic of generating the token is present inside this method, where I'm going to configure this filter post authentication is successful inside Spring Security Framework, and I'm going to configure this as an after filter. So once authentication is successful, I can get the authentication values from the security context holder, and by leveraging a secret key that I'm maintaining inside my backend server along with the algorithm, I'm going to build a JWT token, and inside that JWT token I'm going to set a lot of information. One is who is the issuer of that JWT token, what is the subject of the token, and at the same time claims. We can set any number of claims. Claim is a value that goes inside your payload, and these are the information that you want to share to the other people or you want to store for yourself for future reference. So one value that I'm going to put inside my token is the username, which I'll get based upon the authentication object, and the other one is what are the authorities of the logged in user. Post that I'm also going to set what is the issued at a time for the token, and we can also set an expiration of that token. To make it simple, I'm going to give a smaller milliseconds value. So 30,000 milliseconds means this token will expire within 30 seconds, and you can see the JWT beauty while validating the token. JWT will make sure that if the token is expires, it will throw an error to the user. So lastly, we have to sign it with the key based upon our algorithm and secret key. And at last, we call compact method to generate a JWT with header, body, and the signature key. So once I have that JWT encoded values along with my signature key, I am going to set that inside my response header with the value authorization. So this is the header that we configured inside our cars configurations to allow to send it to the UI application. So this filter will make sure to generate the JWT token whenever user try to log in into my application. Next, I have to write one more filter to validate this JWT token that got generated for all the requests other than the login. So for that, I'm going to write a new filter with the name JWT token validator filter. So as you can expect, this filter also extends once per request filter, and I'm going to configure this filter as a before authorization and authentication, because since already authentication is happened, we have to make sure if the token is compromised, we need to invalidate the request and send a error to the UI application. So the logic here you can see, I also have implemented should not filter, which indicates that this filter should not be applied for the login request, which is /user, but for all other paths this filter has to be applied. When this filter is getting executed, our UI application has to send the token value inside the request header with the same name authorization. So I'm going to populate that value from my header. Once I have the JWT token with the same secret key and algorithm that we used before, we are going to generate a new hash value and compare with the already hash value present inside the JWT token to make sure that the values are not tampered. If there is any issue happens during this code of execution, I'll get an exception and I'm going to return a invalid token received to the front end. If everything goes well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the username and authorities from the token and build a new authentication object and set it into the security context holder. You can see here my backend server is not storing anything. Based upon the JWT token, every time I generate a authentication object without actually looking into the database for the credentials and validating the user, based upon the JWT token values, I'm setting the authentication object inside my security context holder. So once my code execution passes this filter, it will go to the business logic and my Spring security framework will make sure that if all the authorities associated to that user is proper, it will allow the execution. But if someone tampers this username or authorities, obviously this code of execution will fail and will get an exception. And you can see this pass claims JWS method will throw exceptions related to expired JWT exception. Like whenever our token is expired, this exception will come. Unsupported, malformed, signature, illegal, all these exceptions will be thrown in the case of tampered. So now we made the changes to create the filters. Let's try to configure these filters inside Spring Security configurations. For the same, I'll go to the project security config, and we already created previously some filters. At the same place, I'm going to add the newly generated filters. And you can see here I have added the newly generated filters. JWT token generator filter will be used to generate the tokens, and that will get executed after the basic authentication filter completes, and it will execute only during the login operation. And similarly, JWT token validator filter will execute before the authentication for each request other than the login to make sure the token validation is successful or not. So now we have made all the required changes on the backend, but on the front end also we have to capture this authentication header value, and we need to make sure that every request that is coming to the backend has to have that value present inside the header. To achieve the same, let's try to make some changes on the client side code also to send the authorization JWT token as part of the header inside request every time my client application is making a request to the backend. Thank you and see you in the next video. Bye.